Hello and good morning, good afternoon, perhaps good evening. Let's go over drum sample replacement done manually. What do I mean manually? Basically, at a time where I was poor and I couldn't afford the cool plugins that would put kicks and snares and toms automatically there for me, I had to devise a way to do it basically for free manually, and it lends itself, this that I'm about to show you, lends itself to very creative outcomes as well. So keeping that in mind and remembering that it's, what's the word, free, let's jump in. To demonstrate manual sample replacement, I will continue working on this demo of Sitting on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding. So here in this session, you see that we have two drum loops at the top, a drum performance in stylish purple, which has been quantized and consolidated so it's right tight against the grid. Then we have MIDI bass, MIDI piano, and a scratch vocal. So the thing we're going to do first is actually listen to the drums that we have so we can assess what are we working with, and then ultimately what is it that we need to either fix or augment or complement. As you listen, pay special attention to the uniformity of the dynamics of the kicks and snares, as well as the color, if you will, of every hit. Some of them are a little thin, some of them feel a little fuller, and this is something that we're going to make better as we go. Now, with that in mind, here we go.
Watching the ships roll in, and I watch them roll away again. I wanna sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. I wanna sit on the dock of the bay, wasting time.
As you can hear, the overall spirit of the performance is great, and it does feel really solid, and the groove has a lot of pocket because it's tightly quantized, even though it totally feels like there's a human behind it. But unfortunately, some of the kicks are loud, some of them are quiet. Some of the snares are quiet, then they're loud. And this also affects that some of them feel thin, while some others sound full. So now let's go on and try to augment and complement this with samples. As I mentioned, we're going to do this manually, which is a quirky, perhaps proprietary way that I like to do samples. And yes, even though it takes a little bit more time than putting a plugin on it, I find that it yields great results. So the first thing I'm going to do is reveal a bunch of samples I have already pre-selected. So if you see here, I have in this blue 3 different kicks. And then in green, I have 4 different snares. So I've just gone on the samples that I have on my computer or perhaps that I found online, and I found 3 different samples that are purposefully very, very distinct. So this first kick has a lot of low end and it's very punchy. This second one doesn't have as much as low end, but it has a shorter decay and it has a little bit of a brighter beater sound. And then this third one has a lot of low end and is also really short. So why 3? The reason is because perhaps the first and second samples are really going to complement the low end that is lacking in my kick. but this second one maybe is going to just give it a little bit of a different sonic characteristic and a more unique edge. These snare samples, I'm going to play through them quickly, and I'm not going to describe what they are. I just want you to listen for their envelope, how long or short they are, their frequency content, and also just their personality. So as you can hear, very, very distinct personalities of each, and we even have some cool Foley that is going to add a ton of character to the snare. So now that we have these, the first thing to do is make sure that all of these samples are prepared and ready to be put on top of the real hits. As you can see, if we zoom in, some of these hits are starting not quite at the edge of the region, which we're going to have to fix. And then the second thing is also the phase relationship. So you see here that this first kick has a phase positive relationship, and they seem to differ as they go along. So the first thing we need to check before we proceed to editing is looking at our drums, our actual acoustic drums, and seeing what is the phase relationship of each hit. So we see here that this kick has a phase positive signal, and then this snare over here also is phase positive. So with this in mind, we should go and make all of these samples phase positive. So I am going to create a playlist that I'm going to duplicate really quickly, and I'm going to call it edited, and go and do this very, very quickly for each one of these. So now this is phase positive. It starts right at the beginning of the sample, and I'm also going to create a little fade out so that it sounds nice and clean. Perfect. My second one. See here that even though it seems to be phase positive, it starts to get a little bit out of phase as the signal goes. So right away, I am going to just, in Audio Suite, find invert, and I'm going to flip the phase on this kick. This one also starts right where it should, and it seems to overall match the phase relationship we need, so that's perfect. Moving on to the snare. Oh, guys, I made a mistake. I am going to go and create a quick duplicate of these and continue to call them edited so that I can keep myself organized. And I can also backtrack, right? If I make a mistake, I can always go back to the original. So I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate these and label them edited right away. This is the stuff that seems perhaps a little bit tedious, but I find that these are the hallmarks of professional engineers. Again, anybody comes here and looks at our work and they're able to tell what hasn't been edited and what has. So with that in place, I am going to edit this so it starts right when the hit begins. Do the same for these cool coins. Then we have this. Oh, this is an interesting one because this one has a reverse clap. So I'm just going to make an executive decision and decide to lop off that reverse swish and bring this right to the edge of the hit. And that is right on the money. As far as phase relationships, these are very complex. So we're just going to assume that it's going to be okay and move forward. Now I'm going to clean off the tail of this snare since it's pretty long, and let's check it out. Cool. So again, this might seem a little bit tedious, but it's going to pay dividends in a moment. So now we have our kicks and our snares nice and clean, and the next step is going to be to create a group where we can copy and paste all of the kick samples together, make another group where we're going to cut and paste all of the snare samples together and place them over the original kicks and snares. So with that in mind, I'm selecting these three. I'm creating a new group, and of course I'm calling it kick samples, and then creating the last group here and calling it, you guessed it, snare. Not Sandra samples, but snare samples. Cool. Now that that's done, let's make these groups active, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting because, as I mentioned in the intro, this is a manual, proprietary, interesting, and free way to do samples, and this is what I figured out. Basically, if I want to grab these kick drums and place them over the acoustic kicks, I am going to bring this track, the acoustic kick, and put it right below the samples. Same thing that I'm doing for the acoustic snare, right on top of these other samples, right? So I can have a visual cue. Not only am I going to have a visual cue, but I'm also going to be able to do this nifty copy and paste trick. So now I've selected all of my samples and they're grouped, and I am going to copy them. So now I can paste them wherever. The thing that I figured out was that if I make a new group, but a new group selecting the original kick drum, placing the original kick drum at the bottom. So as I said, new group, and I'm going to call this kick plus samples, something descriptive. Now I have this group, and I'm actually going to deselect the drums. So now I have this group that has 4 tracks selected, but you remember that a minute ago, I only selected these 3 and copied them. What happens now is if I put my cursor above these 3 tracks and I ask Pro Tools to paste, it's going to grab the 3 things that it copied, and even though it's looking at 4 tracks, it's going to paste 1, 2, 3, and then because it doesn't have a 4th thing to paste, it will just leave it alone. So let's see if that's true. And there we are. So now we have 1, 2, 3 samples, and it left the kick drum alone. This is cool. This also, to my mind, is, oh, so manual? This sounds kind of tedious. What I will do is I'm going to put this on 1/8 notes, right? We know that these drums have been quantized. So in theory, I could just hover over any one of these hits and paste, and then go and paste. Why? Because the drums are perfectly quantized. But how about if the drums weren't perfectly quantized and I just wanted to do this in a little bit more, in a faster way? What I could do is then get out of grid mode and go to slip and turn on this button, which is tab to transients. So this button here, once I put the cursor anywhere and I click on the tab button, it rolls over to the next transient. So what I can do is hit tab, and right as it stands right at the edge of the hit, I could paste and then continue to tab to transient until it does that for every single hit. Now, this is considerably faster, but we could also say that it's a little bit tedious. This, guys, becomes quite automatic, as you're seeing me do here. So this is something that I just do visually. I don't even listen to it, and I try to go quite fast and go through the entire song this way. Because this is a cooking show, I'm going to stop here, and by magic, the whole track is going to be done. Bam! We're done. Look at the whole thing. Now, of course, we're going to repeat operation with the snares. So here we have our snares, which I am going to copy. And then I'm going to create this new group, which will contain my acoustic snare plus all the samples. And we're going to call this, of course, snare plus samples. And we will repeat operation where we can either tab to transient and just paste these in, or because in this case the drums are super tightly quantized, what I could do is just duplicate this track and just go a mile a minute here because they're all exactly the same. And I'm seeing that I'm making this little mistake here at the bottom, but no worries, I'm catching it. So I'm just going to delete this and Command H heal the track. So now we have, oh, what's this little guy here? This one is interesting. All right, always have to be on the lookout for gremlins getting into the mix. So all right, now we have all of our kicks and snare samples, and just for giggles, as they say, let's listen without these samples, and I'm just going to turn them on, say, halfway through. And let's listen to what this does for the impact of the sound of the drums. Here we go.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting till the evening comes, watching the ships roll in, and I watch them roll away again. I wanna sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. I wanna sit on the dock of the bay, wasting time.
And we can hear the difference is considerable. Not only is the kick drum now extending lower to 40 and 50 hertz and having all of that low end that it lacked before, but it also has a lot of character. So speaking of character, one of the other reasons why I like to put different samples one on top of the other is because it allows me to do things like, for example, if here we have these three different kick drum sounds, and the one that has the most low end is this bottom one. What I could do is select this track of samples and mute them. I'm going to hit Command M and mute them so that it only comes in on the chorus. And maybe what that does, I'm just going to give it a little bit of a level boost. What that does is it's going to emotionally emphasize the climax of the song, the chorus, because now a lot of low end only comes in right on the one of the chorus. Let's check it out.
Watching the ships roll in, and I watch them roll away again. I wanna sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide.
And that really gives it an emotional boost. Of course, we can exaggerate it more, etc., etc. Following the same train of thought, here, I really like in these snare samples, I think that this top sample is the most bombastic and longest one of the bunch. So what I'm going to do is mute these before the chorus. But then there's one that are these coins dropping, right? That one right there. So I am going to take these away during the chorus. And let's see how this just feels emotionally together. So again, more low end on the kick and a bigger, more bombastic decay on the snare for the chorus.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting till the evening comes, watching the ships roll in. Then I watch them roll away again. I wanna sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away.
And it makes it quite distinct. You see here that I put this one snare before the chorus. Well, how about if I grab this snare and try to launch the chorus by reversing it? So here I'm going to render this and I'm going to move that attack so it's right on the one. And perhaps I am going to take this one of these snares over here, this. Cool. And let's maybe make a different pattern. I'm going to grab this snare and duplicate it here. So I'm going to grab every bar because, again, this is perfectly quantized. I can just copy this. And let's see how this transition feels.
Way again. I wanna sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. I wanna sit on the dock.
And here, as you can imagine, to our heart's content, you can grab this kick and duplicate it over here. Maybe put a giant splash of reverb with a plugin that you could render and go crazy. This is the reason why I love doing this by hand, manually. Yes, it takes a bit, but the dividends that it pays both in that I can actually see what I'm doing and make sure that everything is perfectly time aligned. And then that I could just grab any one of these hits, reverse it, turn it down in volume so I can create different dynamic swells and not make it feel robotic. Or just put a myriad of plugins here is really creatively what I love about this process. So let's give it a very last goodbye listen. And I am going to start with having the samples off. And then a few bars in, I'm just going to turn them on and see how our work ultimately feels to the listener. Here we go.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting till the evening comes, watching the ships roll in. And I watch them roll away again. I wanna sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. I wanna sit on the dock of the bay, wasting time.
And there we have it. I hope this demo on how to augment and replace kicks and snares, and for that matter, any sound that has a transient in Pro Tools is useful to you, and that it really, really helps boost the impact of the cool music that you're making.